Okay, good afternoon. What I want to do in the next 15, 18 minutes or so with you is perhaps talk a bit about what we've discussed in the last 24 hours, give you my thoughts a little bit about some of the things I think we're going to be facing in the future, and pick out some key themes which I think, again, we'll need to be focusing on in the future as well. And I've always felt it's always good to look back and learn the lessons in terms of what we can do to develop the future. But looking back too much sometimes, this is a position I've always held, too much means if you are going to look back too much, you only do that too much if you're going to think about going back that way. And I think we are a forward-looking organisation as a service, so it's good to learn the lessons from the past, but it's also good to look forward to the future. So what I'm hoping to do is to get you thinking. And those of you who do use Twitter, we've got our Twitter handle there to get the debate going. Please put your comments on there. I'd be interested to hear them, good or bad. So moving on, we've always worked hard, and as Irene mentioned yesterday, I arranged this. I chair the arrangements committee for conference. So we try to achieve a conference which is first and foremost for you, our members. That's both challenging and forward-looking in the areas we address, and that is interesting and worthwhile for everyone who attends. And I hope thus far that we've achieved that. Now, as highlighted already in this conference, we've all experienced change during our service. Change is a constant, and rightly so. But for any organisation to consider remaining static and fossilised is going to result in only one outcome: irrelevance, ineffectiveness, and inexistence. Now, when I joined in the early 1980s, and I was interested in the comments in the previous presentation we had this morning, technology hardly existed. We had a teleprinter, a burn-depth remote radio that had been in service since 1965, charge sheets, blue, in triplicate, and I remember those because they were completed on a typewriter, invariably with one key missing, and a piece of ribbon which was transparent from overuse. We had beats, and which were policed in a way that a colleague from the 19th century would have clearly recognised. And the equipment we had, well, that consisted of a wooden staff, a pair of handcuffs, and safety training. Well, that was really just non-existent. And we had collators offices. And I can see some of you nodding there, because I'm taking some assurance here, because I'm not the only one of that age here. So it's good that the fact there are some people who have had that experience, and collators officers who clearly were very spectacularly good at telling you what had happened. Now, I pause here a little bit because I'm not sure whether to do this or not, but I think I will, just to check whether there's somebody out there who's going to really depress me. I just want to see if anybody's prepared to put their hand up and admit that they're actually thinking at the moment, what is a typewriter? Good, good. So I've got some assurance. But the point I'm making is, it is generational now. And we're facing a generation which is now really, really engaged in technology, which I'll address in a few minutes. Okay. Things have changed, and we've started to embrace technology such as better communications, covert technology, access to telecommunications data. We've procured and embraced technology to assist policing in delivering a service to the public. But there's a lot more to be done at a quicker pace, I suggest. The role of technology is not the panacea to all the changes we're going to be facing in austerity in the next year or two. But as HMIC stated, it could help in enabling us and our officers to be more productive. Now, we're seeing the rollout of mobile data, enabling better efficiencies in both use of time and service to the public at the point of initial contact. But poor, outdated, unconnected technology is a substantial barrier to such improvement. It cannot be, and this is my personal view, and I hope some of you share this, it cannot be that the citizen in this country has a different experience in their policing service based upon the variable of the adaptation of technology with individual constabularies. How can it be that I can report my crime online in one area, yet I have to physically go and put it on paper or visit a police station in another area? So there's something here about trying to smooth out that postcode of application of technologies to the citizen in terms of their future service and technology in England and Wales. Now, I'm talking here, it's not just simply a matter of kicking the tyres and changing the oil. I'm talking here about a rebuild, a redesign of the service. Sarah Thornton, in her John Harris Memorial Lecture, talked about it, and I think a bit more eloquently than I can, reimagining the police. And the alternative, well, the alternative, in my view, is a service in danger of becoming outdated and as unrecognisable to leaders who will be sitting in this room in the future as my 1980s experiences to those today. So, I've already mentioned technology. I just want to turn my comments to Robert Leach, who spoke on behalf of Capita yesterday. And he spoke about policing in the digital age. Now, some of you will know in this room that I've been speaking about cybercrime technology for some years. And I've been calling it for some years a quiet revolution. I don't think it's a quiet revolution anymore. It's out there. It really is. It's developing at a pace that both in technology and how it's being adapted and used by society and the citizen is presenting challenges for not only us as a service, but for all services, including those of the private sector and government itself. Not just this government, governments across the globe. This is now a revolution that, in terms of historic context, is equal to that of the Industrial Revolution in the 18th and 19th centuries, and will continue, I suggest to you, dominate our thinking. We're dealing with different crimes, different victims, and a different escalation of pace and scale. We need to rethink and perhaps focus on prevention and helping people take a responsibility themselves in not becoming victims, rather than trying to find perpetrators who are faceless, sanitized, and encrypted, and most likely in another jurisdiction. And a quick example, just to amplify that point. A group of Russian hackers in February of this year successfully infiltrated around 100 banking institutions worldwide and accrued £650 million. They've never come to justice, and it was so sophisticated, they were even able to get cash point machines to release cash without a cash point card, which I find quite interesting because sometimes I have difficulty getting cash out of a cash point machine with my cash point card. Right, so if someone broke into your home, this is another example I just want to give you. So someone, in terms of how our thinking is going on this, so if someone broke into your home today and stole £5,000, it would be recorded and have a response to investigate, catch the offender, try and recover your money. If someone today hacked into your account by either phishing or using malware, quite possibly hired off one of the marketplaces in the dark web, and took £5,000 out of your account, I suggest to you it's speculative as to whether it would be reported, and if it was, would it be recorded, and whether it would receive the same level of response as my first example of what we all in this room understand as traditional crime. I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions. Now, of course, it's not just individuals who are experiencing loss via the different means of crime. It's also business. Recent research suggested businesses, on average, right across this country are losing on average £4,000 a year to fraud and online crime. And with the increase of businesses, retail particularly going online and trading, this is going to increase. Yes, a large percentage of this is just not simply being recorded or acknowledged in the current statistics. Our colleague, just literally a few minutes ago, Paul Sanford from Norfolk, did his elective on CSC and new ways of tackling an increasing demand. Quite a sobering presentation, I felt, in terms of what it indicates the demand in this area and what we're expecting. And those of you who are in public protection commands know this only too well, and the pressures it brings to you and your teams. Paul Griffiths, our colleague, who gave, I think, a very good presentation again around human trafficking and slavery. 10 years ago, was that really in the narrative of policing, that we would be dealing with slavery and the trafficking of human beings, and the techniques we're having to adopt, and the challenges we're having to deal with around dealing with victims in a different way and bringing cases to justice in a different way? This is not going to stop. And about looking at the technology and the demand of it, currently 3 billion people access the internet. It's estimated that half the world's population will be online by 2018. Just to remind you, Vodafone connected their first mobile phone in this country in 1985. It's now growing at over 80% a year in terms of mobile internet connectivity, with access to the internet now more on mobile devices than what we would perceive as traditional desktop devices. In fact, I was just reading, just before I came on stage, a piece of research has just come out now. 1 in 4 of smartphone owners, and 76% of adults in this country use a smartphone, are not making mobile phone calls on a weekly basis on them. What they're using is another means of communications. The days of voice communication are dropping significantly. So the first generation iPhone, you can remember, came out in the market in June 2007. What will we be using in another 8 years' time, when I won't be, and probably many of us won't be sat in this room, but when our colleagues are sat in this room, what do you think they'll be using in terms of their main form of communication, and what would that present? And Twitter, well, I said earlier on when I started about using Twitter. Started a year earlier in 2006, it has over in excess 500 million users. You really have to wonder, you really do have to wonder, what will be the next social media revolution? How that will impact on our lives, both personally and professionally. Now, in our first main hall presentation, Projecting the Future in Policing, Zoe Billingham and Chris Eyre, I think, helpfully portrayed a realistic picture of what the service needs to do to consider in terms of transformational change to meet the period of austerity, based upon the HMIC work last year, Policing and Austerity Meeting the Challenge, which was the precursor to the National Debate Advisory Group, which Zoe referred to yesterday. And that produced a paper, if you've not seen it, it's a good read because Irene and I were heavily involved in it, Reshaping Policing for the Future. And we're hoping that that will influence the current thinking around where the service needs to go in the future. Now, also, just to remind you, Chris Eyre, he demonstrated in his hourglass delivery model of where he thinks policing should go. Now, whilst we're waiting for the final decisions on the next CSR, and that will be late in November, we can be sure, absolutely sure, that we're going to have to take more money out of the service and protect the public and keep them safe. All of you know in this room know both personally and for the teams that you lead how painful this has been thus far. I've used this term, I'll use it now. The service is starting to creak from these pressures despite delivering the cuts and the service to the public. We need different thinking, innovation, new initiatives that challenge both us and, yes, in a way, the public. The service has, within constabularies and forces, worked exceptionally hard to have taken out money and reduce the workforce by over 34,000 people and £2.5 billion. And still the public have broadly experienced the same policing service that they're used to. If we have to take the same out again, we will have to do something differently. Now, just by way of example, and I can't remember who referred to it yesterday, so Peter Fahy, the Chief Constable of GMP, was talking in August around missing persons and the demand on missing persons in his force. Per annum, missing persons costs, I think from recollection, GMP £30 million a year. Nationally, the service experienced in excess of 300,000 reports of missing persons. On average, a force each day deals with 12 cases. I agree with Sir Peter. I think the time has come to have that debate as to whether police officers are the right professional to deal with something like missing persons. Maybe even, I suggest, social care step into that space, possibly even at the cost of fewer police officers, if it means we're dealing with that new demand. What do you think? Now, there's a wider debate, I suggest, for all public services charged with protecting citizens and keeping them safe. And perhaps the time has come to collectively look through the same lens of leadership, resources and people, and how we can provide a properly integrated service to the public. It will require, some commentators have said, a reinvention of services that the public currently take for granted. Now, of course, this means trying out new ideas, piloting new schemes, developing the evidence base that any professional organisation should operate within. It means we should accept failure. We should accept failure, not as a criticism or a threat, but as an opportunity to learn and innovate. The biggest risk I suggest to you is not taking a risk, not innovating and challenging, And I think we've had a comment already about how still within our culture and within the service, we are still quite risk adverse in trying these new initiatives. It's quite fantastic how one force is piloting something which just down the road, another force is already piloted and it's already in operation. We've got to get better and more joined up in terms of how we approach this. Now, it may not be popular. It may be commented on. It may not be commented on very favourably by those seeking a soundbite of opinion or populism. But we've got to stay true, and we've got to be confident in ourselves and a service to try out these new initiatives and ideas. Leadership, in my judgment, is about taking those risks and looking forward and describing a vision and where we're going, trying new things, some of which will work and some will not. HMIC have stated, changes are required if forces are to be supported in achieving further substantial cost reductions in the future. Now, with the next CSR coming, the review of the funding formula, as you know, as to where that 7.8 billion, well, it is 7.8 billion at the moment, of central grant is allocated to forces, and the changing nature of crime and demands, which we've just touched upon with the two electives we've just had, I'm calling this a perfect storm. This service have done a lot of work to bring ideas and options forward to reform the service and at the same time meet what we can all anticipate will be a very challenging period to continue to provide a trusted service to the public. As we've heard at conference thus far, I suggest that the next few months are absolutely critical. It is a window of opportunity and could well define the service for the next 5 years. However, what is clear, and we've heard this just in the last 24 hours, is that what the service has done to date and accomplished has been quite remarkable and acknowledged by the Home Secretary publicly and HMIC and others. But as the HMIC said in July, doing the same again is just not an option. It's stated, and I wanted to quote this too, just to remind you as to where the position is, that collaboration between forces, public, private sector organisations remains patchy, fragmented, overly complex and too slow, and is not of the magnitude necessary to meet the requirements of future austerity. And as budgets reduce further, protecting the front line will get harder. This means there's a real risk that the frontline capacity and capabilities of forces will reduce further. Now, within this perfect storm, we've also, next year, a fully fledged political election to decide on the next police and crime commissioners. This is a first in our policing history. I accept we had the initial ones a few years ago, but we will have an election which is directed solely on policing and the appointment of political appointees, many of whom are currently incumbents. Now, I pause here to choose my words carefully and refer you back to my comment that in my judgment the next few months are critical, they're that window of opportunity, and will require everyone in the policing family who is in a position of leadership to be engaged and focused on the national imperative. My concern here is that the challenges of austerity and the need for reform, that we do not have a premium on time, and that the risk of inertia and electioneering could take primacy. Will those difficult decisions, which perhaps are not locally expedient, politically appetising and popular, prevail? Now, I might be a little bit naive in posing that question, but what do you think? In the session, different people make a difference early this morning. We've talked about the fact that this is just not about diversity and protected characteristics. Absolutely, absolutely, these are important. But more so and perhaps wider is accepting difference in people, in how they function and how they think. Do we really want people who fit in? Do we want teams that are of the same mindset, think the same and behave the same? In my book, that's rather boring and binary. We want more richness in our police service. Now, would it not be a great thing that an alternate voice, the one on the Monday morning operational debrief, put their hand up and had an alternate view or an alternate idea to that critical incident or that project that's taking place, but more importantly, is actually valued for doing it? Do you think our culture's in that place yet where we do value that person who's prepared to put their hand up and offer that alternate voice? Can I just suggest to you in this room that it's not our differences that divide us. After all, we're all different in this room in some way or other. But it's our inability as individuals ourselves to recognise and accept and appreciate those differences that creates the division or the divide. Now, as well as accepting difference, we as senior operational leaders and as an association will continue to be that voice of difference. We must also accept challenge and ideas from those we lead, just as we should challenge and encourage those upwards to chief officers and government. We must, in my view, pay equal attention to the people in the organisation and the future of the service as an organisation that is attractive to the diversities and communities we police. We must offer, we must have an offer that's both competitive in the employment market, it's attractive to those people who may not have considered the police and who have the skills we need, particularly I've just said around technology, cyber-related skills. Now, in the session this morning, The Only Way is Ethics, and I like the title, I think that emphasised the importance of how we apply ethics in our organisation. We all have a collective responsibility to live and serve by our code in our conversation, our behaviour, and how we treat each other. And I include there the mindset and how we value difference. It should be in our policing blood. And as Lord Buse said yesterday, and I'll quote him, you just can't publish a code and say you've done ethics. Jackie Cheer this morning reminded us and said that it's about how we serve the public and operate, not just ticking boxes. Now, I began this session by saying that I wanted to look to the future as well as reflecting on some of the things that we've been addressing here at conference thus far. I see the services becoming more integrated with other services, and in my judgment, we need to if we're going to meet the increasing demand in protecting children and the vulnerable in our society. Not with partnerships, which first were originated in legislation in the 1990s, but real integration, sharing risk, resources and leadership. We've been trying hard on this for the last 20 years to work better as public services and partnerships. But I think this is now, we're at a point now, I think we need to go further. What do you think? An example here, which is one I've quoted. Education is now developing in terms of educating children now and in the future to write code and to develop their technology skills. What's absent in that equation, in my view, is education has not thought about how you applied ethics and how you apply behaviour standards to those children. Because what we're going to see are unintended consequences, which are already starting to pan out now, which policing and other public services are going to have to pick up when people start to behave in a way that was never intended by using that new code skill to do things against their fellow citizen. So I think at the moment it's not integrated, it's not joined up enough between education and other services around how we're applying these new technologies and education to the children and the future citizens in this country. So, now I see policing becoming more open and less insular, allowing people to leave and join the service and bring new experiences and ideas into the organisation. Coming back into the service from an extended secondment or being away must be seen as a positive, and that we're keen to learn from you on your return. Certainly my personal experience has been, I went away for an extended period of time. I didn't get many questions when I came back about my experiences and what I could bring back to my organisation at the time. We need to value that. We need to be more open. Our culture moves to one of imagination, innovation, and acceptance, that trying something and failing is not a damning indictment on your career, but one that's seen as a positive, that you've tried and that you've learned. Now, this means change, and you all in this room, your colleagues back in forces, I do, we all have a role in this, critical role. As an association, I want us to continue to focus on the invaluable role you as our members have in the fabric, and I think what I call the DNA of the service, and continue to champion well-being and accepting difference in its broadest sense, both to the higher levels of leadership in the service and also to those we lead as senior operational leaders. This service is going to change, but we must ensure that the accessibility of the service is still there. And something I feel very passionate about is that policing must be for everyone. It must appeal and attract talent from all sections of the community. And it must continue to provide a service to those in our society who may not have a voice, but are equally vulnerable to be a victim, a witness, and yes, even an offender. Some examples would be those individual citizens who are disabled, whose first language is not English, or the growing phenomena which we'll be facing soon for all public services, not only in this country, but right across the Western Hemisphere, the growing ageing population. Now, as I said earlier on, in my view, leadership is about looking to the future and being able to identify those future risks and opportunities. The work in the College of Policing is leading on in terms of visualising that future of policing, I think is an important contribution towards that. But do you think, like I do, that this does present some opportunities to think about early intervention across all sectors and organisations and engage with academia to improve our evidence base in new approaches before they start impacting on us as a service? So, bringing together what I've just talked about, I suppose in a sort of a form of a conclusion, what we've done thus far has been great, but we can't continue to apply what we've done to date to meet the next period of austerity. It just simply won't be fit for purpose. And I suppose what I also want to say here is that, putting it bluntly, just reducing chief superintendents and superintendents and expecting those of you left to pick up more responsibility and risk is simply not sustainable. There is a real need for true transformational change now. There's a need for a collective voice and approach from everyone who has a stake in policing, and above all, the public. Now, it'll be an easy mistake in the next few months when we get told what the result of the CSR is, to focus on the money and not the people, and particularly the value of difference in people. This association has, over the last 3 years, been a key partner in trying to influence and help shape policing for the public good and meet austerity under Irene's leadership. This association will continue to be that key critical partner in the policing family, providing leadership, support and innovation. Now, I just want to finish off here because it was demonstrated to me in the last 24 hours. I saw it in the elective and direct entry with Paul and Liz, who gave their presentation, and I've seen it in the last 24 hours amongst all of you here. There's also something else which no budget can buy, and that's passion. I really do believe this. It's passion for being a superintendent, and what I do also believe in is still a great police service. Thank you very much.